the Constitution in 2014, the state of same-sex marriage. The campaign to win marriage rights for same-sex couples that began somewhat hesitantly in Hawaii more than 20 years ago burst forth in 2013 into something close to a constitutional revolution. The year 2014 very likely will take the issue back to the Supreme Court even as efforts continue to advance the campaign at the state level. As 2013 opened, a decade after the first definite victory in Massachusetts, a total of 9 states and Washington, D.C. had opened marriage to same-sex couples either by court decision, legislation, or ballot measure. For the first time, the ballot box became a place for victory, not defeat, for same-sex marriage as the November 12th election showed the issue could win a popular test, and did so in 3 states, Maine, Maryland, and Washington. As 2013 closed, the total had reached 17 states, and there was at least a first-round court victory in an 18th Utah. The press has been more rapid than for any prior campaign to promote the civil rights of a specific group, such as racial minorities and women. The highest visibility gains came from the Supreme Court. The court cleared the way for such marriage in California, the largest state, and struck down the Federal Defense of Marriage Act (DOMA). They had denied any federal benefits to already married same-sex couples. The Supreme Court ruling on DOMA have influenced lower courts then to rule for same-sex marriage in New Jersey and New Mexico, and was the direct source for a federal judge's ruling in Utah against the state's ban, and for a federal judge's ruling in Utah requiring that states to respect same-sex marriage that unions had entered in other states. The pace of lower court rulings in recent weeks has been so swift that the Supreme Court is likely to be drawn into another look at the issue at an earlier point than many had expected. With a new round of lawsuits unfolding further in 2014, the chance appeared to be quite strong that conflicting rulings will emerge on the constitutionalities of the existing bans on same-sex marriage that for now remain on the books in 13 states. If that does in fact happen, that would set the stage for one or more appeals to the Supreme Court, and the justice would be more likely to get back into the constitutional fray if lower courts cannot agree on the constitutional status of same-sex marriage. Even though the court's actions in 2013 provided a major breakthrough for marriage equality, there were some signs that the court was not yet ready to have to face the question of full equality until it had little choice, as would be the case if there were a well-defined spirit among lower courts. When the court in early December 2012 agreed to review the DOMA law's constitutionality, and a lower court ruling striking down California's Proposition 8 ban on same-sex marriage, it was the first time in history that the court had prepared to issue a direct ruling on the issue. Previously, in 1972, it had passed up a chance to issue a ruling simply leaving intact a state court ruling against such a marriage in Minnesota. Even so, the court showed some reluctance in 2013 to move broadly in either the DOMA or Proposition 8 cases. At the outset, it raised potentially procedural issues that might have put off a definite ruling. In fact, in the end, the court allowed same-sex marriage to begin in California, with approving a right to do so, because it concluded that the Proposition 8 supporters did not have the right to appeal. On the federal law, the victory for same-sex marriage was definite, although it was limited. The only couples who can gain federal benefit from the decision were those who had already been legally married in states that allow them to wed. And the court's main opinion stressed that it was not ruling on the constitutionality of any state ban. The constitutional fact of the state bans has now become the focus of the ongoing campaign to achieve marriage equality, with supporters of the goal voting to press the questions in all 50 states. It appears that there are few remaining states where the legislature is inclined to review the bans. About half of the victories up to now have come from state legislatures, so the strategy is likely to have better chances through constitutional lawsuits in state and federal courts. In each case, the issues that will arise are already well defined. The supporters of same-sex marriage will pursue the argument that their right to marry is a matter of fundamental constitutional fairness, liking it to the successful change to state laws against mixed-race marriages, and the opponents will pursue the dual claim that defining marriage is the responsibility of the state, and that, in any event, there are valid cultural reasons for maintaining marriage in its traditional form. Each will seek to interpret what the Supreme Court has done so far as support for their side in argument, and in doing so, they will be able to cite statements in the opinions the court issued last June to that effect. Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr. read the main opinion on DOMA, written by Justice Anthony M. Kennedy, as emphasizing states' primary authorities over marriage, while Justice Antonin Scalia read the same opinion as pointing toward the end of ban on same-sex marriage. Those, however, were statements made in dissenting opinions, so the views of the current majority remain undeclared. New Year's twin babies born in separate years. As people around the world parted their way into the new year, two mothers gave birth to two of the last baby of 2013 and two of the first baby of 2014. While born just minutes apart, their twin baby entering the world in 2 different years. On December 31, 2013 at 11:48 p.m. Eleni Santos Tejolino gave birth to baby girl Lorraine Eleni Begonzo, who weighs at 6 pounds 49 ounces at MedStar Washington Hospital Center in Washington, D.C. Soon after, her twin brother Brandon Randall Begonzo was born on January 1, 2014 at 12:01 a.m., weighing at 5 pounds 10.4 ounces. I feel wonderful, full of joy and happiness, and a full sense of realization, the twins' father, Warren Begonzo, told ABC News.com. This is her first children ever, and they are beautiful, and she's really happy. In Toronto, two fraternal twin sisters were also being born in 2013 and in 2014, respectively, at Trillium Health Partners Critics Valley Hospital. Older sister Gabriela Pellegrino was born on December 13, 2013 at 11:52 p.m., weighing 6 pounds 16 ounces. On January 1, 2014 at 12 and 12 minutes at 38 seconds a.m. Younger twin Sofia Pellegrino was born weighing 5 pounds 13 ounces. They kind of got that golden ticket. They've got different birthdays. The twins' mother, Lindsay Pellegrino, told ABC News.com. They are going to be best friends for life. We really did celebrate New Year's Eve, Begonzo said. Not a bad way to end the year, and not a bad way to start a year off, said Pellegrino. Both the mother and baby are healthy and looking forward to going home. Two-woman ticket in Texas goes for history in 2014. Austin, Texas AP forget whether Hillary Clinton could win the White House in 2016. Woman women still have yet to run many state houses, but in 2014, through Texas, Democrats are going for a new kind of history, winning an all-female ticket for governor and lieutenant governor, driven into one of the nation's most intriguing gubernatorial races this year is whether Democratic Wendy Davis, whose 11-hour filibuster over abortion restrictions catapulted the state senator to national fame this summer, can not only overcome long odds in a fiercely Republican state but pull off a political first. If Davis and fellow statesman Latika Van Der Plateau, who is running for lieutenant governor, prevail in their March primaries as expected, they will form what political experts says is only the fifth time at least the past 20 years that a party has nominated women for both governor and lieutenant governor. None of these pairings has ever won, nor have a woman governor and lieutenant governor even served concurrently. Arizona in 1998 picked 5 women to the state's top executive office, including the Attorney General Janet Napolitano. So the state has no lieutenant governor. The last all-female governor and lieutenant governor ticket was steamrolled in November by New Jersey Republican government Chris Christie on his easy path to re-election. The pair came away some advice for their Texas cohort. Expect to be marginalized. Just be ready for it, said New Jersey Democratic statesman Barbara Buson, who lost to Christie by 22 points. Not all nominees run as tickets in a traditional sense. Texas is among the states that elect a governor and lieutenant governor separately, meaning that Davis and Van Der Plateau don't come as a package, even though there will overlap in message. The message hasn't focused on gender. Davis talks about education and weeding out colorism while trying to forge a broader identity among voters who might only know her from her stand in pink running shoes on the Texas Senate floor for reproductive rights. But Davis and Van Der Plateau, whose Hispanic can escape their obvious contrast to Republicans, who anti-statewide tickets in Texas this year is shaping up to be almost exclusive. White and male diversity in government, I think, is incredibly important. Davis said, bring a variety of perspective to the leadership table creates better government. Yet, Republicans can argue they are going to the better job of putting women in governance mansions right now. The GOP has fallen nationwide to the one held by Democrats, but the party has recently acknowledged it could do better with women voters, including U.S. House Speaker John Boehner saying in December that some members of his caucus could stand to be more sensitive at times. Unlike Nugent, Davis and Ben Deputy change a popular incumbent turned potential presidential candidate. Texas Governor Rick Perry is stepping aside after 14 years and giving Republican Attorney General Greg Abbott the presumptive Republican nominee. The test of persevering 2 decades of statewide GOP rule. The delegates Davis and Van Du appealed to the states of most female tickets before them, underdogs, despite Texas having a stronger history than many states of electing powerful women leaders. Former South California GOP chairwoman Karen Follett, who helmed the state's party when Nikki Haley became South Carolina's first female governor in 2011, hosted a summit in August to brainstorm how Republicans can elect more women. The problem, she said, is a message about getting more women to run. The Democratic Party has a better track record. They've been doing it longer. Follett said, I think you will see more Republican women offer up. It will be a cascading effect. The closest 2 women have come to sweeping a state's top 2 office was 2004 in Missouri, when now U.S. Sen. Claire McCaskill, a Democrat, and the party's female nominee for Lieutenant Governor narrowly lost. Female Democratic candidates tend to amplify the gender gap in action, said Debbie Welch, the director of the Center for American Women and Politics at Rutgers University. She said the other reason all female tickets were a pair of Illinois Democrats in 1994 and a pair of Kentucky Republicans in 1999. Bonzo doesn't believe being a woman was the deciding factor in the New Jersey gubernatorial race, but said faced misogynistic and belittling remarks in a state where none of its 12 congressional members are women. One GOP county chairman compared Bonzo choosing Mila Sylvia, a Labor leader who previously never ran for statewide office, as her running mate to picking his secretary. When that Patil recalled feeling marginalized in the Texas Senate in June when a Republican began stopping Davis' filibuster. She took the microphone and asked, "At what point must a female senator raise her hand or her voice to be recognized over the male colleagues in the room?" Van Dyke Patil, who will face one of the four men vying for the Republican nomination, acknowledged it is unusual to try winning with two women. "But, maybe it shouldn't be," Van Dyke Patil said. "We just happen to be two girls. That's the way it ended up." Follow Paul J. Weber. How many beauty secrets are you hiding? 8. You are hiding an average of 8 beauty secrets from your significant other, according to an unscientific survey of 2,000 people by beauty product website feelunique.com. They range from removing hot skin from your feet to wearing chicken fillets inside your bra for nights on the town. Also, many women would prefer their partner not know they cut their toenails or cleanse and moisturize their skin. So how exactly does he think the makeup comes off? So why all the secrecy? More than 35% of the women surveyed think their partner would be turned off by seeing what exactly going to looking good. And that fear is certainly warranted, considering the number one beauty secret women hide, plucking or shaving hair from their toes. Think the longer you are together, the more of these beauty secrets will come out. Maybe 20% of women said it doesn't matter how comfortable they get with a partner. They will never ever let him know how much effort going to looking good. Top 20 beauty secrets women hide from men. 1. Blank, shave hair from toes. 2. Blank, waist hair from chin, face. 3. Third, blank the arch hair from the body. 4th, waist or dye mustache. 5. Fifth, remove hot skin from feet. 6. Wear body slimming underwear. 7. Blank eyebrows. 8. Waist shaped bikini lines. 9. Blank hair from nose. 10. Cleaning toes and moisture. 11. Cut toenails. 12. Teeth whitening. 13. Using anti-aging creams. 14. Puts toothpaste on spots. 15. Applies a face pack. 16. Waist shave underarms and legs. 17. Wear chicken fillets. 18. Exfoliate daily. 19. Eyelash and eyebrow tints. 20. Use anti-cellulite cream. Chinese rom-com Finding Mr. Right sends romantics to Seattle. Sure, The Seattle Times only gave Chinese recon finding meteorites 2 stars, but they hasn't stopped Chinese tourists from flocking to the city since the movie debuted in China last March.